You really look like a knight. James complimented Sam, checking out the guy's armor now that he was closer. He remembered that Sam wanted to look like a knight when he first introduced himself to them, so James could understand why it was so important for Sam to select the armor that he did. Sam grinned at James' compliment. He nodded his head at the armor that James was wearing. You also seem to have found something that fits your combat style. Though I only got to witness it for a short period while we were dealing with those rock bears, I could tell that you focus a lot on agility. This is actually a little heavier than the other styles they had presented, James confessed. Hearing that James chose a heavier armor, Sam raised an eyebrow. Shrugging, James said, "Based on what we need to do in this request, I suspect that I'll need to focus on defense more than I'm used to. The encounter with the Forest Cats before meeting your team made me realize this reality." Nodding at James's reasoning, Sam said, "I think you may be correct in that thinking. I have a strong feeling that this will be more difficult than any request that either of our parties has accepted." James frowned at the thought. Though they had the backing of the guild, it didn't mean that things would be easier. The fact that they gave so many benefits only gave him a chill. It was possible that both their parties would be eliminated without even completing the request. While such an outcome would be acceptable for his team, he was worried about Sam's team. They would forever be lost into wherever people part of the simulation went to after they died. Sensing that James was dealing with an internal conflict, Sam reached out to touch James on the shoulder. "We can do this. Just because it's difficult doesn't mean that we can't succeed." James couldn't help but smile at Sam's confidence, even if it was possibly misplaced. "Yeah, we'll finish this request and save Forest City," James said in a confident voice, even if he didn't feel confident. "The two of you seem to be having a fun time," Celine's voice called out to them. Sam turned to look behind him while James sidestepped to see Celine and her brother walking towards them in their new gear. Celine's armor was nearly all pitch black. Like the previous outfit she wore, there was a hood that she could raise to cover her head. Instead of a helmet, there was a metal band that covered her foreheads and cheeks. Instead of metal, her armor appeared to be some kind of leather that looked much more durable than anything he had seen. Aside from the joints, her entire body was covered in the material, aside from just above her breast, which was exposed. It gave a nice view, and would likely be distracting for most men if they were to see her. Though it was something enjoyable to view, James figured that was to help cool herself, considering all the heavy material in addition to the cloak she was wearing. James couldn't see any weapons hanging off Celine's armor and assumed that she had them hidden away. Raul had a different armor compared to his half-sister. Instead of focusing on stealth, his armor had numerous areas that had metal protecting the vital areas. It wasn't as complete as Sam's plate armor, likely to give him better mobility. He also had two short swords on both sides, similar to how James had his daggers.